Hello, everybody. Adrian Plass here.
Yes, and Bridget, hello.
And here we are at number 136 in Sounding the Shadows.
And I'm not coughing, so there
No,
you go.
isn't that nice? Bridget's,
On 136, I've stopped coughing.
Bridget is either healed or cured or has just got better. I'm not sure
No, I've
which.
just got better.
Yeah.
I've just got better. It's been a week of quite extreme things, hasn't it? A lot of, well, in the UK anyway, quite a lot of flack flying around, what with strikes and obviously the publication of that book, causing all sorts of views from all sorts of places. And it's very hard not to feel that there's a lot of attack going on to people. Is that fair, do you think? It feels as though there's a lot of quite aggressively...
Well, I wonder whether in essence what's happening is that after COVID and everything, it's very difficult to land again somewhere safe and easy to handle or possible to handle. And so, although it is confusing, every now and then there's something that lifts you out of it. And we had something on the radio this week, didn't we?
Oh, absolutely. No, and I'm hoping some other people have heard it as well. It was Michelle Obama reading from her new book, The Light We Carry Inside Us. And there's a phrase that, this isn't a new phrase, it's something that she's spoken about many times, I think, over the years. But it's become almost a catchphrase for that family. When they go low, we go high. And it's something she wanted her children to understand, that if you get insulted, if there are low expectations for you, if people don't believe what you're saying, if people attack you, instead of going low and meeting them where they are and becoming aggressive, you go high, you try and go above it.
But it is very important, isn't it? Because I know what she does not mean is that you become better than everybody else.
That isn't what she meant
but
at all.
That you select the way that is the best way to go in dealing with things.
Yeah. And I mean, it reminded me, I know other people will know this, but it was, I don't know how many years ago it was, Adrian, that we went to Robben Island and we actually saw the prison cell where Mandela lived for so many years. And we were told about the fact that right from the beginning, he was determined to be above his situation, not arrogantly, how could you be in that situation, but live right. And if you remember, he was insistent that all the other prisoners, as well as himself, dealt with the people who were holding them with courtesy and politeness.
Because the man who showed us round was one of the prisoners, wasn't he?
He was, and he said, you know, that it was one of the things that saved them all. That instead of going low, they went high. They found within themselves the best of themselves in order to cope with it.
It's a very personal book, isn't it? Her book.
Yeah.
Some of the descriptions of her and her husband and the way they dealt with things are really quite inspiring because they're so small in their own way. I mean, putting their arms around each other when there was a crisis and something horrible happened in the news, and just holding each other while they dealt with it inside themselves. It was a very, very good thing to hear. It really was. Yeah.
Yes, but that has to start from facing head on the thing that is hurting you or attacking you, doesn't it? And we had such an interesting email this week, didn't we, from somebody who used to live in Northern Ireland through the Troubles, and he was talking about something he'd heard that Tim Keller had said, and I've often found Tim Keller really interesting.
He's an American Christian writer.
Yeah, but he's the person who said that you need a little bit of doubt because it helps you to face reality. If you try and pretend there is no doubt in you, then you're not living real. And what apparently he had said in this thing that this guy was listening to was that a lot of people think that to say you forgive people means you've sold out on justice. And that's what many people think. And he said we must be about both forgiveness and justice. And this guy who was writing to us said, I think that's the kernel. You know, we were talking about forgiveness, weren't we, last week? And how far should you forgive and what should you forgive? And what do you do with being angry? And if you remember, somebody had written to us about the fact that they were wildly angry about Putin. They were absolutely enraged about it.
Yeah, and our friend who wrote said, he said, I've lived a lot of my life being very angry about injustice, and I still struggle with it. A few weeks ago, I wrote to BBC about a news report where they got a number wrong, a number of unsolved murders.
Well, they got it very wrong.
Very wrong indeed, yeah.
I mean, they were now saying there were 1,000 unsolved murders, and actually the actual number is 3,269, which is apparently a figure that has been acknowledged in the UK and in the Irish parliaments. But it's made him seethe with anger.
Yeah. And he quotes Jesus' words, doesn't he, from the Gospel of John, in the world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. And it's easy to say that, but at least you hear it from someone whose heart's sunk at times, Jesus, if you read the Gospels as they're actually written. And yet he did what Michelle Obama said. Always went high. Went high. So somehow, a fellow who wrote said, we've got to forgive those who are gravely offend us with their unjust actions. On the other hand, seek justice, and that is a very difficult thing, but a very worthy one. That's how we somehow have to deal with that.
Yeah. How do you do it? And we were talking to a friend, weren't we, who reminded us about the fact that at the end of apartheid, there was a council formed which was based on truth and reconciliation, and how important it was to create a space where the truth can be told, not just by the victims, but also by the perpetrators.
It was a wonderful initiative, wasn't it? And it was part of the reason why the change was bloodless, I think. It was it involved witnesses who were identified as victims of gross human rights violations, and also those who had committed.
Well, they had an amnesty committee, didn't they?
Yeah.
And obviously being granted amnesty means the perpetrator is free from prosecution. And in order to do that, they it meant that people who had been involved with something that they now regretted could speak freely, knowing that they were not going to be punished. It's a big thing, really. I mean, to have a safe place where you can admit to what you've done wrong and be granted an amnesty. That's very special, really, isn't it? I mean, you think of police stations wanting people to give in their knives, and saying you won't be punished, because what they want is something more than just people feeling guilty or people being punished. They actually want atonement by doing.
It won't surprise anybody to hear that Desmond Tutu was part of that body, wasn't he?
Well, as was Mandela, but of course it hasn't been totally successful. But it did make me think, Adrian, can you think of a good example of where we've been able to offer genuine amnesty, in other words, create a space. I mean, I was thinking about when our own children were small. The reason you want them to admit to something that they've done is not very often in order to punish them. Or I think that's true, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's in order that it's in order that a clean start can start. Sorry, I haven't said that very well, really.
You need to plant green shoots in rubbish, don't you? Somehow,
yeah, that's much better way of saying it.
Find a way to make it possible for there to be a positive outcome to something that could, as with Truth and Reconciliation, with people who suffered so much, could have gone anywhere.
Yes.
And resulted in anything.
A real bloodbath at the time.
But offering genuine amnesty it can be quite difficult and thwarting if you're not careful.
Yeah, I like that word, thwarting. What did you mean?
Well, it's about whether we've talked a lot about shelving recently, about putting things on shelves. I think we're going to be obsessed with shelves.
That's because we're surrounded by boxes, we still haven't moved.
No, we might soon anyway. But I think the thing about... I'm just going to talk about being a Christian for a moment, but I'm sure in other faiths people have these same tensions and things. But if you're going to want to do something useful, it's going to be no use saying I am the sort of person who does this or doesn't do that, or will always do this or will always do that, because when the time comes to affect someone's life in a way that is positive and helpful, you're going to have to work out the best thing to do. And I was thinking of somebody who said to me one day, and we had quite a good relationship, considering that this person was actually quite difficult in some ways.
It's a lot younger than you.
Oh, a lot younger than me. But we'd got somewhere. Do you know what I mean? We'd got somewhere. We had a relationship. And it had reached the point, I think, for him, as I learned, as you'll hear in a moment, where the relationship couldn't continue unless I knew what he was actually like. And he asked if he could speak to me one day in a private place, which he did. And he told me about some gross things he'd done when he was younger. And for a moment, I couldn't quite work out why he was doing that, and until I realized what he was saying was, is there space, is there room in this relationship that we've got for you to still be my friend, even though I did these things? And clearly he didn't want to talk about them, and I didn't want to hear about them. I mean, they were horrible. But I realized then that, and it's one of the things you do learn when you're working with people a lot, is that there's no point in reacting to what you hear because something rises in you, unless you look at what's happening in the whole situation with him. It was essential that I didn't say, oh well, never mind that. Doesn't matter that you did that, because it does matter, and he thought it did, and that's why I wanted to talk about it. So actually he was having, by an act of the will, having faith in the amnesty possibilities of the relationship we had, which shows why it's so necessary to build relationship before you try to do something different with somebody's life. That's a little bit of a complicated one, but I think that's what was happening there.
No,
really.
I can see what you're saying, absolutely. That it requires a lot of thought, and it requires... the reason I was interested in this sort of idea of being thwarted, you're not going to get anything from it, and you may have to give away some of your rights in order to create that space. No greater example, of course, than Jesus on the cross. I mean, you know, he had every right, that these people who were doing this and who'd made his life incredibly difficult for the whole of his ministry and were now nailing him to a cross, all the right in the world to not say anything, to not ask for an amnesty for them. And when he said, Father, forgive them, but I mean, they know not what they do. They have no idea of what they have done.
There was a
extraordinary,
a sort of brief text-like quality to that communication, wasn't there? That it's as though Jesus kind of looked at them and thought, my goodness, this is not going to go down well where I come from. I need to do something.
This is not going to go down well where I come from. That's a good way of putting it. But such a moment, such a short moment.
Such a short moment, and the same with all the 7 things he said on the cross. Actually, if people are interested in looking at them, I mean, amazing. But these things are not easy. You can try to make rules about forgiveness and amnesty and all these other things. I've just been really enjoying starting to read Rowan Williams' book of 100 poems.
Oh, yes.
Which consists of 100 poems he's selected from, was it from 100 years?
I don't know. I haven't seen the book yet.
But anyway, there are loads of poems that he's selected, and they're not just his favourite poems. They're poems that really do have something to say. And then he comments on each poem, which is very helpful because some of them are a bit more beyond my understanding of some things. And he writes, as he always does, really well. But one of the poems he writes about is The Journey of the Magi, which is
yes, I remember
a very
that one.
famous poem by T.S. Eliot about the journey that the 3 wise men made.
Wasn't it a life or a death
see
or
Jesus?
Something within it.
It was about. I mean, it begins with the line, a cold coming. We had a bit or something. It was trouble all the way. The people were difficult. The snow was deep. I don't know if there was snow, but the snow was deep. There was a lot of. You get the feeling from this poem. Why are we doing? What are we doing? We're here, and here we are. We found a child now. Now, what is this? And it feels as though it's a life, but it also feels in some strange way as though it's a death.
Yes, I remember.
And after a tough trip, you followed your star, if you like. You're going high. You follow your star, and then you're not confronted by an easy answer. Almost never. Not in the Christian world, you're not.
Oh, and you don't get immediate rewards.
No,
I mean, they did find the child, but often it's sacrificial, isn't it, to go high when everything in you wants to meet somebody where they are and get a little bit of revenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure maybe people said to these 3 guys, what do you want to make this trip for? And they said, we don't know.
Yes.
All we know is we've got to make it.
Yeah.
That we're sure of. But even then, as the journey went on, it would have got more and more difficult. But it is a kind of adventure, the going high thing.
It is such a challenge, isn't it? Because, we were talking the other day about the small moments, about living in the moment. And I know you've said before, Adrian, I mean, because you write, I write a lot of emails, but you write an incredible number of emails. And you love doing it, don't you? But there are times, and have been in the past, where you've had to go over an email because while wanting to appear to be going high, you are actually quite tempted to not grant that person an amnesty, if you like.
It's a matter of
genuinely let them off the hook.
It's a matter of 2 words or 1 word. Those who write frequently, and I'm one of them, for better or worse, we know that you can change the tone of a communication, whether spoken or written, with a couple of differences in emphasis, the choice of words. And you're right. People will soon know whether you actually mean it or not. You're supposed to be doing something worthwhile. But I would go back to this thing about sacrificing our choice. Saying, do I want, and anybody else, but do I want to allow the growth in me of whatever it caused Jesus to send that urgent text to
It
his
was
father
like a text, yes.
to say, look, I know how you feel about this, but look, they're just people. They don't know what they're doing. Well, they do know what they're doing, but they don't know what it means, and they don't know who I am. So, can you just give them a break? And this is why the nails are being hammered into his flesh.
I know.
It's an extreme example, but that's the Magi adventure. That's our adventure. That's the adventure we're called to. Is to say, I want to be, to say, the thing that goes high.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want it to be useful and good.
Yeah.
And we
I
fail,
absolutely.
of course.
Well, of course we fail. I mean, we fall flat in our faces the whole time. But wanting something, making it part of what you want. You know, what do you want in life? It's what people often talk about, isn't it? And if you want to be more than, if you want to go high when everything in you wants to go low, then that's a hope, isn't it?
I think it is a hope, and it's something you have to practice too, to be honest. Anyway.
Well, we'd love to hear from you, moments that maybe you were tempted to not go high, or moments when you did, or moments when other people have been able to offer you an amnesty.
Amnesty. Tell us what you think about amnesty.
Yes, absolutely.
And we'll see you next week.
We will.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.